It's a pleasure to be here in Jersey City, not too far from home. I know the last time I was supposed to be here, we had a small snowstorm that prevented us from meeting and coming together, but I'm glad that we found the opportunity to postpone or do it again because I was looking forward to coming to Jersey City. My father indeed came to the library often, as was stated, with Blue Arc and his jazz wordsmanship, as he would call it, the wordship. So it's a pleasure to be here. As a kid, I would venture back and forth. We called it Chill Town then, from Jersey City to Newark, as much as I could. Sometimes when I didn't supposed to be. When I was older, I found my way to St. Peter's over here to finish out my education before I became a principal. So Jersey City has some kind of role in my life as a child and as an adult. It was around this time, about 2 years ago, is when my father actually passed. In the hospital in Beth Israel, passing out literature telling people that his son was running for mayor while he was in the hospital. My mother aggravated with him, trying to tell him, you got to get well. He's there trying to campaign so his son could become the mayor of the city. Just about 4 months after that, I actually became the mayor, the 40th mayor of the state's largest city. And I wish that he had the opportunity to be at the inauguration in front of New Jersey Performing Arts Center and all of that heat. It was a great day, not just for me and my family, but it was a great day for a lot of people, Newarkers, but a lot of folks that struggled in the city for a very, very long time in cities like Newark, early on trying to make America more democratic, or as I heard lately, somebody say, make America good. During that time period, when we talking about Martin Luther King, one of his last stops was Newark, New Jersey, and he visited my parents' home on Sterling Street then, and later on to a few of the schools, Malcolm X Shabazz, then called Southside High School, and then a short period after that, he was actually assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. We know that part of the story, but he wound up in Newark before that, and there's a whole slew of people who was around then at that time, the Committee for Unified Newark, United Brothers, and all kinds of organizations of the such that organized in the city to make sure that Newark found its first black mayor, its first African-American mayor of a major city along the eastern seaboard. And that mayor, his name was Kenneth Allen Gibson. They were organizing around that time. I was just a baby at the time in 1970 when King Gibson became the mayor. I was born almost a year after the assassination of Martin Luther King. A year to date, I was born April 9th, he was assassinated April 4th. I was born April 9th, 1969, he was assassinated April 4th, 1968. I was born shortly after that, and in that turmoil is when we were electing or trying to elect the first African-American mayor of a major city. And around that time, there was the Black and Puerto Rican Convention that was also being organized in the city to make sure that actually took place, that we had an African-American mayor. And all of that was going on, and I was just a child, a newborn, an infant, growing up in an atmosphere, an environment of struggle, of organization, of community, a revolution, if you will, to change or democratize the city of Newark. Many people have forgotten those times. We're not too far away from them, but we've forgotten them like it was 200 years ago. 1970 is but a small portion of history up until today, but most of us operate like those times did not take place. My father struggled then, he struggled with King Gibson, and he struggled with Sharp James, and he continued to fight and struggle. And the irony of it all is that, his son actually became the mayor of that city. And I would say that things have not changed much since those times. People would argue that we've come a long way, and I would say we've come far, just not far enough. And people would argue that this is not, today is not what was happening during Jim Crow, and I would argue that that is actually not the case. That in fact, we're some 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Most black children are still segregated in African American schools throughout the country. In fact, 70% of African American children still go to school in majority African American schools or segregated schools, and even worse, they're not just segregated by race, they're now segregated by class. The first school that you read about in Baltimore that took to the streets when Freddie Gray was killed by the police was a school called Frederick Douglass Academy. And Frederick Douglass Academy was all over TV. I was on a plane, I remember on CNN, listening to the crazy guy, was it Wolf, was his name, talking about what was going on in Baltimore at the time. And I saw Frederick Douglass Academy come across the screen. I said, you know, Frederick Douglass Academy is the school that Thurgood Marshall graduated from. The irony of that Thurgood Marshall was a alumnus of Frederick Douglass Academy, and if you don't know who Thurgood Marshall is, you probably should come to the library in the morning and not in the evening. If you went through the public school system and you don't know, then we have to have a little protest about what's going on in our public school system. And God forbid you're a lawyer and you don't know who Thurgood Marshall is, right? So Thurgood Marshall was one of the architects, him and Charles Hamilton Houston, of the Brown versus Board of Education cases, which desegregated supposedly public education in America. The irony of that is that the school that he graduated from, still some 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, is 90% African American and 70% low income. And the real trauma of that is that it's just not that school. Actually, the 5 other schools around Frederick Douglass Academy share the same demographic. And even more troubling than that, if they ventured a little further north, you know, if they left Baltimore and went to Philly, they would have found the same thing. If they left Philly and went to Delaware, they would have found the same thing in Wilmington. If they left there and came up to New Jersey and hit Camden, they would have ran into the same thing. And went past Trenton, they would have saw it in Trenton. They would have went all the way up to Newark, and it would have been visible in Newark. And in Jersey City, the same exact thing is taking place. In fact, all over the country, our children are still segregated in these schools. So it makes us wonder, how far have we actually come some 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, that our children are still concentrated in these schools and concentrated in poverty, concentrated by nationality, by race, by underemployment, and by hopelessness. These are our cities, and you know, as we struggle with these cities, as I struggle with the city of Newark, what I'm really struggling with is America's problems. And so they make us believe that we're struggling with problems that are just germane to where we are, so we don't find any unity in neighboring cities and neighboring towns. We think that things are just crazy in Jersey City, or whatever Channel 12 tells us over and over again 100 times a day, how hard, because they play the same thing over and over again, you know, and all of it is negative. Right. 100 times a day, we don't find any unity in our struggle. So we believe that the problems that exist in Jersey City are Jersey City's problems, or the problems that exist in Newark are Newark's problems. We don't understand that the problems in Jersey City and the problems in Newark and the problems in Camden and the problems in Trenton are America's problems. These are America's problems that are happening nationally, that we have been given the charge over, trying to overcome or break up here with the small amount of resources that we have, with a little bit of resources that we have over and over and over again. And so we've been witnessing in America about 40% of our children grow up in poverty. And so in Newark, 33% of the children grew up in poverty. So we close to that. We've been witnessing double-digit unemployment for the last 50 years. The unemployment rate in Newark has went down slightly, but you know, the real unemployment is very large. And they just talked about a couple of days ago that real unemployment for African Americans lingers somewhere around 40 to 50%. Real unemployment. Not those are the people who are not collecting unemployment, people who are not in the labor pool, people who are the age is there for a labor pool, they're able to get a job, but they do not have a job, they're not actively looking for a job. They are here in these communities, wandering around in these neighborhoods, hopeless, looking for employment. And in Newark, there are about 4,000 kids who are not attached to the public school system. That means that they are not in school at all. So the whole argument about public versus charter, we're talking about kids that are at least in the classroom. And the research says, even if you sit in the classroom in a school that's not working, that you're better off than not being in the school at all. So we are arguing about kids who are in the class when there's 4,000 kids in Newark who've never been in the classroom, who are not in the classroom today, who are wandering around our neighborhoods and standing on our blocks and our corners. And I would have bet you everything I had in my pocket that it resembled the same thing in Jersey City. Yeah. That these things are the same way. And then they want us to believe that there's a crisis in American education. And I tell everybody, everywhere I go, I'm supposed to speak at the Black Alliance for Educational Options, and I plan to tell them that there is no crisis in American education, that in fact, more Americans graduate from high school and college now than any point in the history of this country. In fact, more black people graduate from college now than any point in this history. The only crisis in education is the crisis in our neighborhoods. There's a crisis in my neighborhood. There's no crisis in public education. There's a crisis of poverty. There's a crisis of unemployment. There's a crisis of racism. There's a crisis of concentration of these things in my community where I live. And instead of dealing with the problems that actually cause the stress in our school system, that cause the problems in our school system, we blame it on the school, we blame it on the teacher, we blame it on everyone else, and we say we need to fix the school system, but nobody says we need to fix poverty. Say we need to fix the classroom, and nobody says we need to fix the isolation and hopelessness and segregation of whole classes of people. Nobody talks about those things because it's easy to say school is the problem, because it's more difficult to say that wealth is concentrated in very few people's hands, and the majority of the people in this community have no access to jobs, no access to wealth, no access to real employment. In fact, 1 out of 4 of our children or our families are food insecure in the city of Newark, and that resembles the national outlook as well. So I don't get embarrassed when people talk about the data or the statistics in Newark, because to me it resembles the rest of the country. In fact, I think it's my job as the Chief Executive Officer to say as much as I can about the demographic of my community or how it looks, to make a clarion call so the rocks don't have to cry out. So I have to say what is actually going on in my neighborhood, in my community, because America needs to know what's happening in these cities. America needs to know what's happening in these communities, even after the so-called civil rights movement. At the end of King's life, he was in despair that the same people who marched with him in Mississippi did not follow him to Chicago. That the same folks who was opposed to racist violence of Wallace in the South was not opposed to the violence of joblessness in Detroit. The same folks who risked their lives to make sure that you could eat in certain lunch counters refused to go to Memphis to make sure sanitation workers ain't earned a living wage so they actually eat in the very lunch counters that they couldn't go into before. He was a bit distraught by the fact that people were willing to fight for social justice or social democracy, but did not want to fight for economic democracy in America. So he began to talk about two Americas. In fact, he gave a speech at Stanford University that you should check out. I know all of us think that the only speech King made was at the March on Washington in 1963. In fact, that's what we've taught about, we learned about most of our lives. In fact, we only know one part of that speech, the part of it that says, "I have a dream." I would bet if I went around, people would only know that part of the speech. But he talked about a contract, a check that wasn't cashed, right? Insufficient funds, a democracy that didn't make its way to all Americans. But he talked about Two Americas at Stanford University. It's one of my favorite speeches that he gave. He said one America was a prosperous America that blanketed the citizens and kept the chill of poverty and indifference off of their backs. And the other America left the folks to grow up in the elements, to suffer, the cold, the blizzard, the heat on their body, that were not protected by this democracy, that did not have an economic contract with this country. And that is the America we still live in today. And I know people are afraid to talk about, that's why Bernie is getting so much discussion, because that's the America that people refuse to talk about, the America King identified. King said that there should be a guaranteed income. That's what he talked about. He said that we needed a guaranteed income. I don't know any elected official, anybody today, even the most conscious activist that I found on the street is talking about a guaranteed income. King, at the end of his life, said there should be a guaranteed income for all Americans, at least a foundation to keep people out of despair and homelessness in these communities. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. talked about. I know that's not what you learned when they had his face on the Miller highlight posters, when they was trying to teach us about Black History Month. It's probably two people we learned about, Martin Luther King and maybe a little bit about Rosa Parks, but we don't know really, and honestly, we don't know really anything about any of those people if we really think about who they were and what they were about in this country. Our kids are still today fighting, saying Black Lives Matter. And why I find that disturbing is because in the Dred Scott case, it said that, when the slave tried to sue for his freedom, the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court of the land, said that Black people were actually property and that we had no rights that they were bound to respect, and that property couldn't sue its master, right? So your cow can't sue you, your chair, your house can't take you to court because it's your property, right? And so that's what the basis of Dred Scott was. And so when kids are saying Black Lives Matter, what they're saying is that I am a human being, and still in this century, in this present day, our young people still have to declare that they have humanity like other Americans, that they indeed are not animals, that they indeed are not property, but that they are human beings here in America and deserve to be treated as human beings and deserve to have all of the rights that come with not just being a human being, but being a citizen of the United States. And we're still having these struggles and still having these fights. And I just want to say we've been a little too quiet. And I thank God for those kids in the Black Lives Matter movement. As a matter of fact, when anytime I get interviewed and I'm on TV, I get a chance to say something, I say, thank God for democracy. Isn't democracy great? Isn't America a great place? These kids get to, get on TV and be disruptive and talk about the things that they think are affecting their lives. This is what we learned in history class of what made America great. So I don't see how these kids are problematic. What they're doing is just in the tradition of fighting for democracy as any other American would do in the history of this country. It's a great thing that they're doing, as a matter of fact. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And as an elected official and as my job in terms of celebrating Martin Luther King, there's a lot of work for us to do, in fact. In fact, we cannot take the blame for the way that our community is doing. I just want us to begin there. There was a big red line drawn around Newark, so I just want to start with Newark. So maybe if I talk a little bit about Newark, maybe you can make some comparison to Jersey City a little bit, right? So, after World War II, there was a big red line drawn around my city. And people began to come back from the war, and there was something going on before that with FDR and the New Deal, right? And after that, after people began coming back from the war, but you have to understand that during that same time, Jim Crow was still alive and well in America. So we didn't get a new deal, we didn't even get an old deal, so the New Deal didn't come to us. So they drew a line around, a circle around my city, which means you couldn't develop in the city. And the federal government subsidized housing in my neighborhoods, and they called it projects. And they concentrated people in these projects, in these high rises. In fact, Newark had more projects per capita than any other city in America, so we started calling it Brick City, right? Because it had more projects than any other city in America. So they concentrated us all on top of each other. No health care, no jobs, no training, just housing. It was an experiment, a project, if you will. And so they put us in those projects, and then they subsidized the suburbs. So what they did, they began building things like 78 and 280. They ran it right through the neighborhood of people in our community. They used eminent domain and took over people's homes, and they built roads and highways right through where they used to live at, and they subsidized housing in the suburbs, so they allow people to move to the suburbs and still have the opportunity to work in the city and take the wealth and go back to the suburb where they lived at and extract wealth from these neighborhoods and make the community less and less viable, more and more poor, and more difficult. They took all of the wealth, all of the resources. You have to understand that America's GDP is created in its cities. It's created in its cities. So they took the wealth out of the cities and moved to the suburbs, and blamed you for not having the resources to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. So then they drew a red line around that community and banks refused to develop in there, refused to invest, refused to grow those communities, refused to bring jobs in those neighborhoods, and introduced heroin into those communities. So heroin and dope plagued our streets and our communities in a time when we were deeply poor and deeply in poverty, in a sense of hopelessness, when all of America outside of us was beginning to benefit from FDR's program, from WPA projects, from hiring the chronically unemployed, the highly unskilled. They were finding them jobs. And the excuse we use today is we can't find people jobs because they don't have any skills. Well, FDR created programs where you didn't even need no skills. They made sure you had a job and gave you income. That's what people could say. I lived in Newark. My family came here and we was poor. Then we moved to the suburbs, we rich, and my son is a doctor now, my daughter is a lawyer now, and then you feel inadequate and inappropriate and insecure because they gave these people subsidies to do these things in these communities, and they left you to fend for yourself in these neighborhoods, in these communities alone. That is a fact. And that's called redlining. And maybe you should look it up so you don't say the mayor came to Jersey City and made something up. It's called redlining. And they drew that red line around our neighborhood and said, this is, no money goes here, right? So now, you know, after they subsidized the removal of hundreds and hundreds of people, they told us, you know, when I was in college, I used to believe that people left Newark because of the rebellion. That they got scared and they left the city. Well, I'm gonna tell you that people were leaving already. They were being subsidized. And though the rebellion was just the straw that broke the camel's back, right? That was just the nail in the coffin. They said, oh, we really gotta get out of this place now, right? And so now everywhere I go in the city, everywhere I go in the state of New Jersey, you know, I meet at least 2 people that's from Newark. You know, they used to be from Newark. You know, they tell me how their family grew up in Newark, and Newark is this and Newark is that, but they left. And they're not there anymore. We left it to you, and they look and you watch channels 12 and 7 and say, see what them people have done to my city. See what them people have done to my city. No, the banks did that. Federal policy did that. State guidelines did that. This is what drove not just our cities, but our schools. Because schools were funded by property tax. Before Adler versus Burke, they still funded by property tax because they have not paid us through Adler versus Burke the money that the Supreme Court said they should pay these schools because it's unconstitutional to fund education through property taxes, especially when most of the people don't own any property in the first place. 70% of the people that live in my city rent. So they don't own their homes in the first place. So the property taxes are not the same, especially also in a city where 3/4 of the people don't pay any property tax whatsoever. So if the schools were funded by property tax and everybody began to leave, and the value went down, and the property values and everything began to plummet, so did the finances and the resources that were going to these schools. And so our schools resemble the way our neighborhoods were being treated, not just because, you know, it was horrible people in there, but because the bottom fell out purposefully. Not by accident, on purpose. So now the reverse is happening. People have found out that they want to live in a city. They call these people the millennials. They want to move to these cities. They, you know, and it's good and bad. So they want to move and they want to grow in these communities, in these cities. And so they took the, you know, they took the red line off of it a little bit, right? They spread it this way. So they allowed the development to take place in certain parts of the city, but there are parts of my city that the same building have been abandoned since I was 4. So they allow development in certain parts of the town, but other parts of the town don't enjoy that same level of development. So we have to actively try to create policy locally and encourage people to come and develop in the neighborhoods where people actually live every single day. Or the only part of your community that will be developed is the part of the community where you don't frequent much. And this is what's happening. This is not a Newark problem, by the way. This is not a Jersey City problem either, by the way. It is an American problem. And it's time for us to begin to see our problems in its national scope so we can understand that this is not happening because of a few incompetent leaders. They make us believe that, and then we change leaders every 5 minutes. We get angry and we get rid of them, and we never get into the root of why our communities are in the shape that they're in. We never have the real discussion about how we transfer power and wealth into the neighborhoods and how we make our communities better than they are. And so we struggle with one another. Sometimes we struggle with one another as a distraction, and other people get us to struggle with one another. They get us to struggle with one another. Meanwhile, they continue to make profit off our demise. They continue to grow off of our isolation, of our anger. And because we're not clear as to why we're angry at everyone. And because we don't understand what the root of our problem is, everything becomes a problem. And because our kids can't figure out how they got in this situation, why their mama is unemployed, why they haven't had a job, generational unemployment, they ain't working, their daddy ain't working, his daddy ain't working, and why this has been happening for years, they figure that work is not in their future. And so the only work that they know is the underground work on the street that goes on. And you want to know why the murdering and the killing is going on in your community, because there's no tort law, no court in the street. When people when corporations owe each other money, they sue each other and take them to the street. What they do to us is we out in the street shooting each other with guns from countries that we never even visited. Our kids got Russian AKs and Chinese-made assault rifles and choppers and Israeli Uzis and places they can't even pronounce, cities they never even went to. It's quicker for them to get a gun than a decent loaf of bread, quicker for them to get a Russian assault rifle than to get a decent loaf of bread or milk or a fresh piece of fruit even. It's easier to get that than a diploma, easier to get your hands on illegal drugs than it is on a high school diploma, a college degree. It becomes easier for them and become more accessible to you, so the floodgates is open. Somebody has allowed, because you ain't grown no drugs down the street from where you live. There's no poppy seed fields around the corner from your house. There's no gun manufacturers in your neighborhood. Matter of fact, there ain't even no gun store in Jersey City at all. There's no gun stores in Newark. There's no swap meets. I can't buy assault rifles from the corner store. Hell, we ain't even got a Walmart. I can't go to the Walmart and buy a shotgun. Where the hell is the shotguns coming from? How they get the shotguns, the assault rifles, the 9mm, the Russian AK? Somebody opened up the floodgates and allowed them in our communities and our neighborhoods, and our kids get access to them like so many pieces of candy or so many pieces of lint in their pocket. And there's no real outrage, no real discussion about any of that. Or we discuss other things. We don't discuss how our kids get their hands on these guns. That's why it's easier for people in other neighborhoods to say they oppose the gun laws. It's easier for people in other communities to say we support the NRA because, we want to purchase assault rifles. The assault rifles killing us. Ain't nobody in our community hunting deer with assault rifles. So we argue again. We argue for gun control because we're trying to save our babies' lives. It's that simple for us. It's clear mathematics for us. Our kids are dying from guns that they don't have access to if it was not for these corridors that allow them to bring guns into our community and the drugs that follow them. They've built an entire underground of drug activity. You can't tell me that the greatest, most powerful country on this planet can't curb drugs from coming into this place. If you can fly all over the world and kill people that are hiding in bunkers 30 feet under the ground that you can't see with planes that can, look under the ground, bunker buster bombs. You mean to tell me you can't see guys on the corner selling drugs or drugs coming up and down the highway, dumping off in our community? I don't believe it. I never believed it. I never believed it. And the reality is, if we love King, then we have to speak up. Because many of us just love King on his birthday. We don't know him no other time than that. We just love King when it's appropriate. During Black History Month, when the newspaper allows us to like him, when our job gives us programs, a day off, when we can celebrate his name, when everybody can sing Kumbaya and hold hands and talk about how great of a man King was. That's the only time when we can talk about King. But if you love King, you struggle for the same way King struggled. King was courageous. He wasn't just brilliant, he was courageous. He fought at times and in periods where it wasn't popular. He didn't just do or go along to get along. He spoke out and spoke up when it was necessary. And sometimes, he paid for it. He paid for it. And the great thing about struggle that I always like to remember the hopeful side of it, because I don't want us to feel like when we struggle that, ultimately the price we're going to have to pay is death. But we should be willing to pay the ultimate price for the things that we believe in. When King was arrested in Birmingham, the only thing that he had was his Bible. And they take your property when you get locked up, right? So they took his Bible. They took his Bible when he was in jail in Birmingham. And the beautiful thing about that is when Barack Obama became the president of the United States, they swore him in on the very same Bible that they took from King in Birmingham. And that just told me that God is on the side of the righteous, right? That ultimately that same Bible that wound up in jail with King made its way through Jim Crow, through his assassination, all the way up to present day, to when Barack Obama became the president. I bet when that jailer was taking King's Bible in Birmingham, he didn't know that it would wind up in the White House on the president's hand. I bet when they were cursing King out and calling him all kind of names and throwing him in the jail and taking his Bible away, they didn't know that Bible would make its way to the most powerful place on the planet. That God said, you did this now, but I'm going to fix you later. That Barack Obama put his hand up and the other hand on the Bible and swore in to become the first African American president of this country on the very same Bible that was taken from Martin Luther King when he was arrested. So I don't want to keep you here all night. So I get a little passionate when I'm talking about this, because every day I have to struggle with these issues.
I like your father.
Every day I have to struggle with these ideas. Every day, and I have to explain to people. Sometimes and it takes me so much not to get really angry sometimes. Explain to people why we are in the conditions that we are in. And some of these people that I talk to look like me. And I have to explain to them why we're in these conditions and what our role and responsibility is here as elected officials. I have to remind people that Medgar Evers didn't die in his wife's arms on his lawn in Mississippi so you could be the first Negro in charge of anything. That people weren't killed killed or murdered, on their way home from the Selma to Montgomery March just so you could walk around with a title. Nobody got beat up and hurt just for you as an individual. It was done for us as a collective, right? So that we all benefit from democracy, not just you. Like nobody benefited for your seat. Like nobody got hurt just for King is not dead. Didn't get shot in Memphis on a balcony so I could be the mayor of the city. He got killed in a balcony on Memphis so I could change the community of Newark where I was born and raised. My father didn't die in Beth Israel Hospital. He didn't walk, he didn't get beat in the head during the Newark Rebellion simply so I could sit next to people who didn't allow me to sit next to them 25 years ago. If I'm sitting in a seat, they need to know I'm there. When I walk in a room, they need to feel my presence. When I open my mouth, somebody needs to move, something needs to shake. People need to feel who I am and why I'm there. They need to understand my history, my pain. When they look in my eyes, they need to know that we are here, we have come, and something is about to be different that didn't happen before I got to this place. So if you walk in the room and things are still the same, if nobody ain't a little uneasy, if they're not just a little afraid, if they're not talking about you enough, then you're not doing as much as you should possibly do. I like when people get afraid. I like when they start chitter-chattering and they shake it a little bit or they spread gossip or rumor, because it means that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. That I'm doing what my father put me here to do. This is what this means. And I didn't get this seat, because of my resume. I know many of us believe that, and it's okay. Our children believe that. They believe, hey, you just got a great resume, and we teach our children that. Work hard, build up your resume, you get a good job. I just remember that there was a time when they wouldn't even read my resume. So I work hard, I get a good resume, but I remember in my mind who I am and where I came from. That way I stay attached to the struggle, to people, to community, so I understand that when I benefit, everybody else that came behind me should benefit as well. There was no New Deal for us. No work projects administration for us. No Marshall Plan. They redeveloped Europe and gave them $13 billion, which was equivalent to $130 billion today, to build schools and roads and develop the economic system after the war. We've been in a war since we got here. Nobody gave us nothing. We didn't get any deal, no New Deal, no urban, no Marshall Plan, no nothing. It's time today that we ask in this presidential election for an urban Marshall Plan. It's time that they spend billions of dollars on jobs and infrastructure, job training for our children, and building new schools. Our kids go to schools that were built in 1890 and 1865 and 1900. We need new buildings and new schools. We need training for our babies. We need infrastructure, build new roads and water and sewage and new hospitals. We need all of these things now, and we need money for these things. And don't be afraid to say that we need money in these communities. I'm never afraid to say that, well, you people want welfare. You owe me everything that I get. I want welfare, farm subsidy, whatever you got. I want to have it. I want Social Security, my pension, I want everything. You don't got enough money to pay me that everything that we lost on our journey here and our stay in this country. It ain't enough money in the United States Treasury to pay our families for what we've lost and what we're still losing in these cities all over America. We deserve every piece of thing that we get, every penny, every dime. People say we want a handout. Ain't no handout, it's what you owe me. I'm not ashamed to say any of that. You got your hand out. You're right, I got my hand out. Right? When you go to the store and you pay for something, you put your hand out so they can give you what they owe you. My hand is, in fact, both of my hands is out because you can't give me enough in one hand, right? I need them both. And that's what we need to be demanding. In a form of reparations, we need to be demanding an urban Marshall Plan for them to invest in our communities because of redlining, for them to employ our people because of segregation and Jim Crow, to take care of our mothers and our grandmothers because they're growing up, because they're raising our children and our grandchildren in single-headed households, because there's more African-American men in jail today than it was at the height of slavery in 1860. There's more African-American men in jail today than it was in apartheid South Africa at its height. You owe me everything I get. And that's what we have to be saying. And we cannot be afraid to say these things, especially as they attack our Voting Rights Act, as they attack the housing, as they attack women's rights and equal pay for equal work. As they attack all of these things, we can't afford to be quiet anymore. I know it's easy to be quiet. I know it's easy, mind your business, be quiet, shut up, just go along to get along and go to the church, pay your tithes, go home and just be quiet. It's easy to do that. I know it because I'm in a profession where people tell me to do it all the time. You shouldn't be talking about that stuff, man. You know you can get reelected without talking about that because poverty was there before you and it's going to be there after you. They was killing people before you became the mayor, and those Negroes gonna kill people when you leave. The education system was terrible before you became the mayor, and when you leave, it's gonna be just the same. You know you can't fix all of these problems in the period of time that you're gonna be the mayor. Why worry yourself to death to do this? You're not gonna do anything but create enemies for yourself and make it more difficult for you to get elected. Who cares? Who cares? Nobody died for me just to be the longest serving mayor of the city of Newark. If God says I can't be the mayor tomorrow, then so be it, I can't be. That's right. The reality is we have a job to do and we ought to fix the problems that we can fix and do what we can do while we have the opportunity to do so. There's a story that I love in the Bible that I've been talking about for the last few months about a man named Daniel. And most people, they don't know anything about Daniel except that he fasted. Because if you go on the internet, that's what they have on there, the Daniel fast. Everybody was doing the Daniel fast. They fasted because, that's what Daniel did. But no one knows why Daniel fasted in the first place. There's no discussion about why Daniel was fasting, The king offered Daniel something, And Daniel refused to eat the king's meat. That's right. And so he had to create his own diet. And come to find out, his diet made him stronger than the king's diet. But the other folks wouldn't know that because they were so busy eating the king's meat. And it's so deep to me that we love the king's meat and we don't do what we're supposed to do in the eyes of God. We do what we're supposed to do in the eyes of the king, right? So and the only way that the king can feed you is if he knows what you desire. And they know what you desire because they refused you from having it all of this time. They wouldn't give you position. They wouldn't give you notoriety. They wouldn't give you money. They wouldn't give you fame. They wouldn't allow you in places, so now you can come in. Now you get a little dollars. Now they give you position. Now your name is in the paper. Now they give you notoriety. And so the king's meat looks more inviting than the stuff that the people are eating every single day. So you like the king's meat, and so you grow up on a diet of the king's meat. And then you feed your children the very meat that the king fed you. And then you wonder why your children have no respect for you because the king's meat is designed that you worship the king and not you. And so your kids worship the king before they worship you. Your kids are praising other people before they praise you. They don't look to you, they disrespect their own mothers and fathers because their mother and father can't feed them. Their mother and father didn't create a diet for them. In fact, the king did that. not only should we not eat the king's meat, we need to create our own stores so we can sell the stuff that we want to create in the first place. Go any further, we need to begin to grow and develop the food that we sell in the stores that we own and begin to create the diet that cooks the food that we eat off of and feed our people off of that food and feed our babies off of that food so they don't have to rely on the king at all. And when we become independent enough, we don't have to rely on the king, then we can say what we want to say, we can do what we want to do, we can walk where we want to walk, we can go where we want to go, and we won't have to be afraid. That's what free people looks like. He was laying out a methodology of how you become free. And we didn't want to be free. We just wanted to eat the king's meat. Freedom is too hard. It's easy to sit down and let the king cook the food for you. Go to the store and get it for you. Put it in the pot and stir it up for you. And then give you, portion it off to you to let you eat what you can eat. And then he take the most of it for himself. And it tastes good too. It tastes real good. And you sitting there looking at your folks out there. I say, I don't know why you're not eating this. This is really, really good. You need to come in here and eat this. If you eat this, you won't have to worry about nothing. You don't have to worry about another election. You don't have to worry about anything. Just come join me and the king will take care of you, take care of your son, your grandson, and everybody around you. And the rest of them people, they just ignorant because they don't want to come over here. They jealous of you. And what you should do is separate yourself from those people because they don't know no better. If they knew any better, they wouldn't be over there starving, right? They must be ignorant because they would rather sit out there and starve than eat the king's meat. And that's the logic that they give us. And so Daniel was smart enough to know that he shouldn't eat the king's meat, but then again he wasn't going to starve. That he was going to create a diet of his own. He was going to get strong off of his own diet and his own food. And it's time for us to do what Daniel did. To create our own diet. Eat that food that we develop for ourselves and feed our children off of that food and make them strong and proud the same way your mothers and fathers made you strong and proud. I grew up on my mama's food.
All right.
Not off the king's food.
All right.
I ate what my mama fed me in her kitchen, in her house, with her hands. I ate that food. And that food fed me, not just physical food. We're talking about spiritual and mental food as well. Because that's the real food. The king's food just doesn't come in material form. It comes in form of education. It comes in form of spirit. It comes in the form of news and TV. It comes in the form of all of those things. And when you consume all of that, the enemy becomes you. And you grow up on a diet of self-hatred. You grow up on a diet of self-hatred. And everybody you see that looks like you becomes your enemy.
That's right.
Because they fed you as a baby. They nurtured you off of that diet. But that's not the diet I had. I am so grateful to God that I had not grown up off of that kind of diet. The food I ate was self-love. Self-empowerment. That's the food I ate. The do-for-self food, right? The food of freedom, justice, and equality. The food that said that if there's no justice for me, there's no justice for no one. The food that said if there's no justice, there's no peace, there's no genuine happiness, there's no justice. That's the food that I ate. I grew up off of food that said that all of us should have a right to democracy, that we have a right to decent health care, that we have a right to quality food, that we have a right to employment and a living wage, that we have a right to live and not die, that we have a right to walk this community and not be gunned down in our back or choked for selling cigarettes or murdered in a car for playing our music too loud or shot in front of community centers because we playing with toy guns. I grew up over that kind of food, the kind of food that said if I live in the city and I'm the majority, the elected officials ought to represent the majority of the people in the city. That's what I grew up over that food that said the police force should look like the people that lived in the community. I grew up the food, that kind of food that said that I don't support people who don't support me. That I don't follow people just because they pay me, just because they give me compliments, just because they let me in their house, just because they let me sit at their table. I don't follow people simply because they're in charge. I grew up with food that said, I have no master but one. That's why I didn't understand my discussion with Christy. He kept saying that we want to pick your superintendent. Which one of the superintendents do you want?
None.
And you know, some people in the community didn't understand why I didn't engage him or fight with him about which superintendent that we got. Because I grew up in a place that said slavery was wrong no matter who your master was. I don't care if the master beat you or if the master fed you and let you dance the jig in front of his house on the porch. A master is a master, whether it's a good one or a bad one. I don't want no master. I want to be free. And the only thing I need is to be able to be in control of my own schools. I don't want you in charge of them, and I don't want you to pick no superintendent. Until we get to that day, then I don't even want to have a conversation about who the superintendent is. I want to have a conversation about how I control my own destiny, how I control my own schools. I want my babies to know that we did this ourselves, that even if it's broke, it's mine, and I have a right to fix it on my own. Even if it don't work, I have the ability to try to make it work myself. I don't got to call you to come in and fix nothing or build nothing for me and take the credit for it. Give me what's mine, what belongs to me, and let me and my people in my community fix it and build it. And if we fall, damn it, we fall, but we get back up each time we fall. That's what I'm happy about every single day, that each day I get to wake up and have different mistakes and not the same ones again. I'm a human being just like everyone else. Y'all making mistakes in training, we're going to make some in Newark. But we get a right to fix our own mistakes. I don't care how many mistakes we make. We can make 10, 20, 30 mistakes, but they're our own mistakes. God gave me the same authority, the same mind, the same power, the same heart, the same hands, the same muscles to try and struggle and grow and build, just like He gave you. And when you make a mistake, you don't turn the state over to some other state. When you make a mistake in the state of New Jersey, the federal government not coming in here and getting rid of you and saying, we're going to run it. There's some mistakes made in Newark, and damn it, we're going to fix our own mistakes in our own city, because the city itself belongs to us. Don't make you believe that you're inferior because you make mistakes, because you fall down. I don't know human being that have never failed. God has given us the ability to fall, but also the ability to get back up. If you fall down, maybe you should fall on your back, because if you fall on your back, you can look up. And if you can look up, you can get up. If you can get up, you can walk away. That's exactly what we need in the city of Newark, and we're going to continue to fight for that. So I don't know how long. I don't know how long. How long we have, or how long it's going to take, I don't know how long. I didn't get it to count how long. I don't know. All I know is today. All I know is this minute, this second, this moment that we have in history. And I am so grateful to God for the moment that He has given me, this time period today, this right now. And we get to struggle as hard as we can in this moment in history to make as much change as we possibly can, so we pass the baton off, that history tells the story correctly and treats us kindly, and say that we were on the side of right. No matter what happened, you will never put me on the side of those who oppose the people, and I will be on the side of right. So when the story is told about King, some 50, 60 years after he walked this planet and did the things he did, people are celebrating him all over the world. The very people who plotted to destroy him are forced to take a day off on his birthday. The same people that talked about him have to keep their kids home from school on a day and say, why we gotta stay home today, Daddy? Because it's Martin Luther King's birthday. That's why we gotta stay home today. The very same folks that just try to defile his name have to celebrate and bow down to King. And if there's any proof that there's a righteous being, a higher power, is the proof that I have to see in people's faces in that school when they can't come to work that day when I was a principal because it was Martin Luther King's birthday. And I can look them in their face and say, Happy Black History Month, Happy Martin Luther King's birthday. I'm going to go home and celebrate Martin Luther King. And when we come to school on Monday, I'm going to play Letter from a Birmingham Jail on a loudspeaker so every kid in this building can know why they got a day off from school. And all of you teachers in this building will also know that you have to celebrate Martin Luther King despite what you feel, despite what you think. King is why America is even more democratic today than it has ever been. If King didn't exist, Barack Obama wouldn't exist. And that is a fact. So I thank you for having me, Jersey City. I thank you for allowing me to come here and talk to y'all this evening. I enjoyed myself. God bless you. God bless you.
Well, thank you very much for being here and hearing the message from Mayor Ras Baraka. And if I am allowed to say, the apple did not fall far from the tree. We have a award of appreciation for Mayor Ras Baraka for all the work he's done and the strength and energy and spiritual power and knowledge that he brings to our community and his community, which is one community. And that, so I love the part where he's talking about the tale of two cities. And Jersey City is definitely the tale of two cities.
Yes, it is.
And I think anybody that lives here knows this. And everything that Ross said strikes right at home. I think we all know the truth and the facts behind his message. And that. So with that, I want to present this Martin Luther King Jr. Community Service Award 2016, presented to Mayor Ras Baraka for your distinguished and outstanding contributions to the public service, activism, and social justice, presented by the Community Awareness Series of the Jersey City Free Public Library.